So I'm logging in here. So to create a OData project, we need to go to a T code called SEGW. Okay. So here you need to click this button, create project. Just like we created a SAP UI5 project, so similarly we need to create OData project in our backend. So I'm giving the project name as ZB72 underscore EMP. So we are going to create a employee OData project. So description, I can give that 72 employee OData service. Now coming to this package, so if you want to save that in a package, you can save it. Then it asks the transport request and all. So I'm saving that as a local object. All right. Now inside the OData project, there is a structure. So when we create a SAP UI5 project also, we got a structure and we understand that structure, correct? So similarly here, when we created a OData project, it also contains a structure. In that structure, the first folder is data model, and then service implementation, runtime artifact, service maintenance. So these three you can ignore in today's class. So you will automatically understand them in tomorrow's class. In today's class, we are going to focus on data model. Okay. So data model is very, very, very important, guys. Very, very important. This data model, whatever that is present inside the OData project, this data model only exposed as a OData service. So if you open a OData service and see this data model components exist inside the OData service. In other words, I can also say one thing, and that is the data model is the connecting point from OData service to its business logic. This is always a question even for me when I started this web service concept, and that is when the web application calls the OData service, how the OData service knows which backend method to call, how the OData service will redirect the execution to the appropriate function or method in the backend. So this was even a question for me when I started this web service concept in the beginning of my career. So if you want to understand that how this particular web service redirect the execution to the appropriate function, you need to understand this data model perfectly. Data model is modeling of your data in a middle layer, that is for a communication in a middle layer, so that the front end can call the web service, and this particular call will go to the corresponding method in a backend. Okay, so let us see the components of the data model. So data model, the data model contains three things. One is entity type, second one is associations, and third one is entity set. So entity type, entity set, and association. So in today's class, we are going to understand only these three, that is what is entity type, association, and entity set. First one, let us see the definition of entity type. So once again, guys. Yeah. So first one is the entity type. Let us understand entity type, the definition of entity type. So entity type is it's a structure or collection of fields. We can call it as entity type is a structure or collection of fields okay. And this particular entity type, we can say like it act as a replica of your backend database table or tables. Okay, so we can have any number of entity types. Now, by reading the definition, I'm sure none of you might have understand about this definition. So, entity type is a collection of fields, means structure. And this particular entity type, this can also be called as entity, guys. Entity type or entity. We can call it as entity. We can call that as entity type. Anything is fine. So this entity acts as a replica of your backend database table. Now, what is this acting as a replica of your backend database table? So I will draw one more diagram to make you understand about this entity type. Okay. So all of you observe, this is my backend. In my backend, let us take a simple example, that is employee table is there. Z employee. Now inside the employee table, there are three fields: employee ID, name and designation. Just an example. Employee ID, name, designation. Three are there. Okay. Now in the front end, there is a web application. The web application has a form to create a new employee. Employee ID, name, designation. Okay. So from this example, you will understand what is entity type and why it is required. Okay, right. And assume there is a submit button here. Submit button here. Right. Now we know that there is a SAP Gateway system here. In this particular SAP Gateway system, what we deploy? We deploy the OData service. What is OData service? It's an outcome of the OData project. Now, inside this particular OData service, you can see this data model. You can see data model. So data model means three things: entity type, entity set, and association. Now first one, entity type. So let's see this entity type. In this particular backend, this is my backend system. So inside the backend system, we created SEGW OData project. Now inside the OData project, when I created, we have this business logic, for example. So inserting the data into this particular table, that is insert query. So insert ZB72 or Z employee from some structure. Okay, ls underscore emp, some business logic is already there, let's assume. Okay. Now tell me, can your front end, on click of the submit button, can it call this particular logic? No, this is not possible. right? This is not possible, and that is the reason the OData service has came into picture. Why this is not possible? The reason is the front end is JavaScript framework and the back end is ABAP. So two are two different technologies, so it is not possible. So you created a OData project and written the business logic inside. So this business logic, insert business logic, has been written inside this OData project, and you have given a interface, and that is OData service here. OData service. It is as good as your electrician has come. He connected the wires and all, and for you he provided the switch. Now the switch is your OData service. Okay. If you want to switch on the light or fan, you no need to go to that backend stuff, that is wires. You can simply click the switch. Right. So in my example, this insert query is like your wires, red and blue wires in the backend, and this OData service is like a switch. Okay. So basically, the front end will call this particular OData service, and this OData service will go and call this insert query in the appropriate method, whatever the method in which you have written this query. So this is what happens. Now, to be more elaborately, now you will understand about the entity type. So here inside this OData service, as I told you, data model will be exposed. So whatever the data model you created in your backend, the same data model is exposed in your OData service. That means I will create an entity called employee, for example. So entity type, it's a collection of fields. You can create any number of entity types. So basically, an entity type is nothing but a replica of your database actual table. Now, I have my actual table called Z employee. I will create an entity in this particular OData project with the name employee. Okay. So here I can come and create an entity, create entity. Entity type means entity only. So when I create an entity, it gives me the facility to keep all the collection of fields. Okay. So I create an employee entity and I will keep empid, name, designation. So basically this entity is created in the OData project. Don't get confused. Here only I am creating entity. So create entity. So where I am present in the backend system. Whatever you create inside the data model, this data model will be exposed as a part of the OData service. This is what you need to understand. Okay. So in simple words, indirectly, whatever the structure of this table, the same structure of the table you are creating like an entity, that's all. Okay. This is entity or entity type. Employee is what? Employee is entity or entity type. It's an entity. Or entity type. Now, how this will be helpful in the middle, when you click on the submit button, you need to pass the employee ID, right? You need to pass the employee name, right? You need to pass the designation, right? To whom will you pass? Will you simply pass in the air? No. You need to pass to the exact placeholders. So basically what happens is this employee ID will be passed to this field inside your entity, and this is passed here and this is passed here. Now you might have understand what is an entity or entity type. So in simple words, an entity or entity type is a collection of fields, and exactly it's a replica of your backend database tables. It's a replica of your backend database tables. So why this is needed? This is needed to receive the data from front end to the backend. Okay. So the front end person, when you click on the submit button, he will pass the data to the fields of the entity. He will pass the data to the fields of the entity, and since this OData service is like a switch, so it automatically calls the backend logic, and it will also send this data to this method, that is employee ID, name, designation. All these three will be supplied to this particular method into a structure. So I can write insert Z employee from ls underscore employee, which is a structure. Got it, guys? So this is the story of entity type. So an entity type is a collection of fields, nothing but a structure, and this structure is it is simply a replica of your backend database table structure. Okay. Actually, we are creating. Remember the entity type, whatever it is created in the backend. So that means inside the OData project, I am going to create it. But whatever you create inside the data model, this will be replicated into your OData service. Okay, right. 1 second. All right, next. Now, once you understand what is this entity type, the next thing we need to understand is entity set. So entity set is like a internal table and can hold multiple records of its entity, and there is a relation between entity type and entity set, and that is 1:1 relation. Now what is this? What is this 1:1 relation? Every entity type will have its own entity set, and this entity set is an internal table and hold only the records of this entity. It means that if I create an employee entity, employee is an entity, then it automatically creates an entity set called employee set, whereas employee is just a structure, but employee set is an internal table and it can store multiple employee records. So similarly, let's say there is another entity called project, then project will have its own entity set called project set, and this can store multiple records of the projects. So similarly, let's say there is a department. Department is an entity, that means only a structure. Then there will be a department set which is an internal table and can store multiple records of this department table. So basically, let me again explain with an example, then you will understand. So let's say again this is a web page. So here you want to display all employee details. Here all employee details you want to display in this table. Employee ID 1000001 2 3 4, name Sambabji, Tirupati, Rizwan, okay, Monica, Madhavi, blah blah blah. All this employee list I want to display in the front end web page. Now again, so let's come to the understanding part. So obviously, to pull all the employee data to the front end, what is the query I need to write? Anybody can tell, right? So select star from Z employee. Will you agree with me? So we'll write a select query. So select query will give all the data from this particular table. Now again come to the concept, can the front end directly call this query? No, not possible. Then how this is possible? Again through OData service only. Okay, so who is going to give me the data to the front end? So this is possible using entity set. Since you have the employee entity, so similarly, whenever you create an entity, the entity set gets created. This entity set is a runtime table, internal table. Internal table means a runtime memory. It is not a permanent storage. This is not a permanent storage. Now basically what is happening here, the front end will call your OData service only. The front end calls the OData service. When the front end calls the OData service, this particular OData service, okay, basing on its parameters, this will call this logic, select star from the employee table. And this particular data is kept in this internal table, employee set. And front-end SAP UI5 will take the data from this entity set. So here, SAP UI5 can get the data from this entity set because entity set is a part of the data model. Entity set is a part of the data model. And I told you all these three which are part of the data model are exposed to the OData service as well. To the OData service as well. This is SAP Gateway system and this is OData service. So inside my OData service, I have employee entity, I have employee set. Okay. So basically here this arrow is little wrong. One second. This arrow is wrong. So front end will call this entity set, employee set. So employee set is part of the OData service only, right? So front end will call this entity set employee set. It can call employee set because it's part of the data model. So always remember anything which is part of the data model is exposed into OData service. So entity type, association, entity set, all these three are present in OData service. Okay, right. So I'll just show you a previous batch OData service just for understanding. So we are also going to create, don't worry. See, this is employee entity. Entity type, name, employee. See all the fields of your backend database table, employee ID, name, designation, skill, employee email ID, salary, rating, date of joining. Okay. So similarly, entity set I will show you. Entity set, employee set, entity set, project set, entity set, photo set, entity set, resume set. So like this entity sets. So basically the reason behind showing this one is to make you understand that whatever are present inside the data model, so this data model is directly exposed to the OData service. So this is my OData service and I can see my employee set. So front end, what he will do, the front end will call this employee set, which is part of your OData service. So the OData service understand that this fellow is calling this employee set. So basically this fellow needs all the data from the table. So this will go and call this method. And this method select star from employee gives all the data to this entity set. It gives all the data into this entity set. And we know that entity set is an internal table. It's an internal table. It can hold all the records of the employee. It can hold all the records of the employee. So from here, again, SAP UI5 will receive and the same data will be displayed in the front end SAP UI5 table. So this is entity set. So remember, for every entity, there will be an entity set 1:1 relationship. Okay, right. So with this, I think you understand what is entity type and what is entity set. And now association. So association is a relation between the entities. So relation between the entities means, obviously, when you have multiple entities, there will be a relation between the entities. For example, employee and projects. So employee is one entity, project is another entity. One employee can have 10 projects, another employee can have 20 projects experience, right? So the relation between employee and project entity means project table you can consider. So one employee can have one employee can have any number of project experience, 1 to n. Okay, so this is called as the header, and this project I can call it as a line item. Purchase order and its line items, work order and its line items, kind of thing. Okay, so let me take you to the project to make you understand what is association and why this association is used. So whenever you want to see the related data of a particular employee, the data belongs to the other tables. So in that case, this association will come into picture. For example, this is Rupesh, which is an employee. Now when I click on this employee, I am not only able to see only employee data, but I am also able to see the project data. But this project data is not present in the same table as that of employee. The project table itself is totally a different table. The project table stores all the projects of all the employees, but I am able to see only Rupesh projects here. So how this happened? So this is where association will come into picture. And if you see, this is the attachments of Rupesh. Okay, somebody has randomly added this middle, so ignore that. But so basically this is the profiles, multiple profiles of Rupesh. Actually, this particular profiles are stored in a separate table again, but how they are coming here along with the Rupesh data? This is because of the association, means relationship between the entities. So the definition of association is relation between the entities is called association. Clear? Employee can have a relation to the project's entity. Employee entity can have relation to the photos entity or resume, profiles, so these entities. So this particular scenario basically called as a line item scenario, header and line item scenario. Okay, so this is where the association concept will come into picture, relation between the entities. So that's all for today. So let me just rewind what we understand in today's class. So in today's class, first of all, we understand what is OData service first of all, why the OData service has came into the picture. Second, we created this OData project, and inside the OData project, we created the, we understand about the data model. So data model means modeling your data in such a way that it can be exposed to the front end. Whatever that is part of the data model, they are exposed into your OData service like this. Entity type, another entity type, another entity type. Okay. So entity type is a collection of fields, and these collection of fields will act like a replica of the same database table structure in the middleware. So when you click on the submit button in the front end, you will pass the data to these fields. Okay, not to the directed backend database, not possible. So front end will pass the data to these entity fields, and from these entity fields, the data will be collected and passed to the method. Okay, right. So this is how the data will pass. So similarly, whenever you want to pull the data from backend to the front end, the entity set will come into picture. Entity set is a collection of fields of the same entity. Entity and entity set both are 1:1 relation. Each entity has their own entity set and it can store multiple records of this entity. So during pulling the data from backend to the front end, so front end will call this entity set. The entity set is part of the OData service only, so it will go to the backend and hit your automatically the read operation or query operation. So as a result, you will get the data back to the entity set. We know that entity set is an internal table, so it can store multiple records. And same thing, we can get it into the front-end SAP UI5. So here, SAP UI5 can talk to this middle box, but the SAP UI5 cannot talk to the last box. This box is backend system and this box is the middle gateway system. So that's all for today. So in tomorrow's class, we are going to create our first entity, that is employee entity, employee table. Okay, so both the things we are going to create. So I'm going to create an employee table. I'm going to create an employee entity. An entity creates its entity set, and then we'll see how to pull the backend data into the front end, how to generate the OData service. So we know that this OData project will be exposed as a OData service. So how this is done, so all these things we are going to understand in tomorrow's class.